Welcome back to Otaku Daikun. I'm Dai, and this video is about censorship and localization. Honestly, this is one of the heavier topics I ever planned to speak about. Well, it turns out that some video games are getting a lot of attention for being censored by their publishers. Lynn, in Xenoblade Chronicles X, has gotten her skimpy outfits covered due to her age. Armika in Street Fighter V has a less prominent slap ass, and swimsuits were replaced in Fatal Frame. The reasons behind this self-censorship vary, but are typically in reaction to social media controversy, with feminist critiques or other journalists using our games to advance their social agendas. Supposedly, this is why Tecmo Koei adamantly refuses to bring Dead or Alive Extreme 3 to the West. I, for one, find it all to be incredibly ethnocentric, shallow-minded, and Puritan. This business practice isn't exactly new, but it has reached an all-time low with Nintendo's localization of Fire Emblem Fates. The two games, Conquest and Birthright, have been torn to shreds by Treehouse, the localization team responsible for bringing the game overseas. The most famous change is the removal of the game's petting mechanic. We are able to stroke and pet the hair and faces of your fellow comrades to strengthen your affections with them. That's just the tip of the iceberg, however, as optional swimsuits were covered or removed, and entire sections of the script were erased or completely altered. There's a section of the game where your protagonist apparently spikes a lesbian's drink with a magic potion that makes her ultimately fall for you. That's gone, regardless of your opinion. It's not just sex getting butchered, though. Look at this clip demonstrating a skit between two characters. The right side of the video shows a fan translation of the original Japanese script, and the left shows the trash that we got instead. Seems odd, right? In Japan, you've got two soldiers talking about how many people they've killed on the battlefield, which seems appropriate for a tactics war game. In North America, you get nothing. Hell, it looks like the writers just deleted all the text and left the dialogue boxes blank. There is no excuse for this. None whatsoever. Nick Maragos, a localization writer for Treehouse, had the gall to post a video claiming that the upset revolving localization is spurned from a fear that our games will be taken away from us. He claims that no social justice warriors, nor Anita Sarkeesian, are taking the games away, and that gaming is now far more inclusive as a community. Nick, you're like a poacher telling me not to worry about endangered dolphins. You say this when you're directly responsible for taking away our games. Sure, we've got games like Senran Kagura or Dead or Alive to get our dose of fan service, but there are fan service elements in Fire Emblem too. You did take those away. And even though there's more to the game than fan service, there are definitely people who looked forward to Fates so they could pet their virtual waifu and dress them in bikinis. You're not to judge. The relationship elements introduced in Awakening and developed further in Fates have brought Fire Emblem's popularity to the skies. Don't you dare tell me that our games aren't being taken away when you yourself are doing just that. In fact, you and your team are nothing but slimy, disgusting vermin, a cancer to an industry you don't deserve to work in. If I had things my way, you'd all be out on the streets cleaning sludge from gutters. It'd be far more beneficial to the gaming community. I've got at least $280 I really wanted to spend on a new 3DS and both versions of Fire Emblem Fates, as well as all this ridiculous DLC you keep stuffing down people's throats. But since you censored the living shit out of these beautiful games, I cannot, in good consciousness, support you. Nevertheless, there's a lot of defense for these changes, many trying to avoid the term censorship altogether, describing it as good business. For instance, Cassandra Lee Morris, Lynn's English voice actress, publicly reasoned that the changes made to her character weren't even censorship at all, but rather localization. I think we need some definitions here, because that's just silly. Localization is, for our purposes, the process of bringing media from Japan to Western regions for sale. This encompasses any and all changes made to the media to try and appeal to Westerners and improve sales. It covers legally required alterations, such as conforming to PEGI or the ESRB, as well as translation, and, yes, even censorship. I've seen people comment that censorship only refers to when a governing body restricts freedom of speech, which is also just so shallow of a definition. Censorship also refers to the modification or removal of content deemed by one party to be offensive or inappropriate to another party. During localization, companies employ self-censorship as a tool to avoid controversy and public backlash. We can clearly describe the alterations to Fire Emblem Fates, then, as self-censorship during the localization process. The ESRB certainly didn't require censorship in order to achieve a teen rating. Not while you can pet Miku and company in Project Diva and get the same rating. So, Cassandra, if you ever see this, nice job on Lynn's voice, as I really enjoyed it, but you're only partially correct about this. We are indeed talking about censorship within the process of localization. Besides, it doesn't make the changes any less upsetting. I also find it necessary to differentiate between two different types, or rather extremes, of localization: faithful and aggressive localization. Faithful localization is just that, translating the spoken and written text to overcome a language barrier, and possibly some transliteration to match lip flaps in an English dub, or to make text read more fluidly in another language. These changes do not censor or alter the core ideas of the work, but simply help consumers get access to content without having to know Japanese. Aggressive localization is anything past that, such as script changes, replacing terms or cultural references, adding accents, rebranding, altering character names, traits, relationships, or anything that actually changes the experience. It's during aggressive localization that problems really start occurring. Okay, I get it. These are companies, and they have every right to do whatever the heck they want with their products because their goal is making bank. From a certain point of view, however, it can look like a skilled artisan making fine china and entrusting it to wild, shit-slinging gorillas for distribution. Business is business, but bad business blows. So rather than simply stating my disapproval of aggressive localization, I'll approach it from a business perspective and argue that aggressive localization is ultimately self-defeating. What I mean is, companies jump through hoops to appeal to their consumers, but actually piss them off, losing money in the process as paying customers cancel their pre-orders and turn to imports, fan translations, or simply lose interest altogether. I also assert that a more faithful localization will always sell more than its aggressive counterpart. I'll support this claim by covering 4 different ways that aggressive localization demonstrates bad business practices. The first, misidentifying the target audience. It's ridiculously easy to offend people. We've got a mom who's pissed off at a plastic figure of Slave Leia, parents banding together against Barbie dolls, all while another parent plays Dead or Alive beach volleyball with her daughter because they enjoy dress-up. I, for one, find most mainstream rap extremely offensive for its misogyny, yet Eminem doesn't seem to need my money. These Western audiences certainly aren't unified in their beliefs. Just look at politics. In most cases, catering to one audience totally screws over another. So it's important to know who your loyal consumers actually are and appeal to their interests. Are the people so offended by Lynn and petting actually the target audience? Are feminists like Anita Sarkeesian the target audience? I sure hope not. She's not even a gamer, apparently. In most cases, the critics and complainers have no intention of buying, regardless of how the offensive content is dealt with. Rather, they're inventing and using controversy as a means of forwarding their socio-political agendas. What I'm trying to get at is that the biggest target audience for anime and games happen to love works from Japan because they're foreign, and because they have features that appeal to Japanese sensibilities. We're used to fan service, and many of us love it. At the very least, being offended would be a severe reaction. So a company makes changes to please a group that won't support them, at the expense of making a less appealing game to those that will. Doesn't this seem counterproductive? It may not be localization, but a company like Rockstar seems to understand its fanbase enough to know not to bend under social pressure from irrelevant sources. The Grand Theft Auto series constantly offends people, but succeeds very well nonetheless. And those are games where you can solicit hookers and kill them to get your money back. I think petting is sweet compared to that. Next, failing to see a product's appeal. It sounds odd, but there are companies that feel a product from Japan won't sell well in America unless every bit of Japan is sucked out of it and replaced with something American, such as Brock having onigiri. They need to go ahead and change it into jelly donuts because we don't understand what that is. We won't appreciate it or enjoy it in the slightest, apparently. They have the belief that things making anime uniquely Japanese won't have any appeal in Western markets. That would be like me determining Doctor Who had no North American appeal because people wouldn't get the British humor. It would be like me taking Jackie Chan out of kung fu movies because he's too Chinese and Americans wouldn't be able to relate to his struggles as a character. The best anime example of this is Tokyopop's release of Initial D. All the things that the fans loved about the show in Japan were mangled or removed from the US version. The Eurobeat music in particular was replaced by in-house rap and metal. The characters were all given cheesy nicknames, everyone had forced slang in their dialogue, and there was even a rumor going around that Tokyopop wanted to change Takumi's tofu deliveries to the hotels at Lake Akina into delivering pizza instead. They tried to paint the entire show with a Fast and the Furious attitude, thinking that the show just wouldn't appeal to Westerners in its original form. As it turned out, Tokyopop went out of business, and I think the poor reception given to this horrible localization contributed to its downfall. Currently, the anime is enjoying a more successful, faithful localization by Funimation. And there was much rejoicing. There's a saying in Hollywood, nobody knows anything. That's meant to illustrate how difficult it is to predict what will be popular. It's the attitude that results in tons of spin-offs and sequels. But shutting out new or foreign ideas can be really foolish. Think of Star Wars. Knowing the marketable titan that Star Wars has become, one of the most popular and best-selling franchises for over 38 years. The idea that a company wouldn't invest in it seems absurd. Regardless, it still happened, seeing as how both United Artists and Universal saw doubt in Lucas's proposal for the first film and refused to fund it. Too bad they didn't shoot first. It's not wise scrapping features from Japanese media. It could be like throwing away gold. Third, disrespecting the original source. Remember those shit-slinging apes? I call localizers that because they aren't artists, nor are they game developers, but rather business people. It's like a movie director adapting a work they aren't familiar with, or haven't done the research for. It's like M. Night Shyamalan making a certain Avatar film. It's like the Super Mario Bros. Movie. It's why Hayao Miyazaki only trusts Disney with his films, under the condition that they never make any cuts or alterations, out of concern that they'll become the next Warriors of the Wind. Instead, localizing companies should learn their places and pay some respect to the content, taking it as seriously as we fans do. Their goal is to make a more appealing product, but without the talent and passion of an artist, they're truly undeserving of the power they get. Lastly, the exclusive nature of censorship. Censorship, by nature, is exclusive in that it involves removing content from a work. This is generally more alienating than inviting. Taking features away from a work doesn't expand its appeal, instead it narrows it. If someone's offended by a feature being included in a game, they can always ignore it and still enjoy the rest of the game. Remove the feature, however, and you've instantly lost sales from fans looking forward to it. You cannot expand your audience by removing features. It's counterintuitive. Now, what happens when an aggressively localized game, such as Fire Emblem Fates, turns out to be really successful? Well, I still stand by my argument that aggressive localization is self-defeating. This means I can't give companies like Nintendo of America any credit for their efforts. The original work is just so good that it'll succeed despite being hacked to bits. To illustrate this, I'll tell you the farmer's tale. Imagine a farmer who lives in a village and owns a magic tree that grows the most beautiful and delicious apples in the world. They're highly coveted for having mystical healing properties. Now, the farmer sells these apples fresh to the villagers. But for anyone outside the village, the farmer takes the apple being sold and bashes it against the tree, giving it a large bruise. Sure, the apples lose some of their customers this way, but since the apples offer so much more than their appearance, people still buy them. But that doesn't mean it's a smart idea to abuse or defile the apples. In this case, it means that if the farmer didn't bruise the apples, the sales would be even better. Here's another way to look at this. I find Birdie's design in Street Fighter V to be far more disgusting and offensive than anyone could be offended by Laura's design, for instance. Yet social justice seems to have a bigger problem with Laura than with Birdie. Now, I'd be willing to tolerate Birdie, so long as the game was fun to play and gave me reasons to buy it, like Laura and the other fan service elements. But since Capcom took too many of them away, they've guaranteed that I won't buy the game. People can tolerate parts of a work they don't like, so long as they're catered to in other ways. I personally would argue that Fire Emblem Fates would have sold even better had it employed a more faithful localization strategy. While they're not exactly business reports or university studies, polls have been done on GameFAQs asking whether or not people intended to boycott the Western release of Fates, and they generally show that 30% of voters would. 30% is a pretty large demographic to lose over optional content. The worst case in all of this is that censorship becomes more and more prevalent, and we may never get our anime or games in the West unscathed, if at all. The most profitable part of the market, we otaku, have slowly been losing our interest in official localizations, turning to imports and fan translations. Ultimately, this is my protest, but I hope I've achieved more than claiming censorship is wrong, even if that's absolutely true. I want to open a discussion on this, a fairly civilized one. I've presented my view, but I'm sure there's plenty to critique and disagree with. In particular, I want to hear from people who actually have boycotted a game or anime for content that offended them, but would have certainly made that purchase if the content had been censored. Does censorship actually help the sales? I just don't see it. This video has been about profits, target audiences, and fan bases. However, there's an even deeper discussion to be had about morality in society. Is the content being censored from anime and games actually harmful to society? Should such content be censored whether or not it's profitable? Eventually, I plan to discuss sexualization and feminism in Japanese media, as well as how it's perceived in North America. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see more. As always, celebrate your fandom.